Hello, welcome to another edition of the Willie Bragg Show. I am your host, Willie Bragg, in solidarity again with Pride Month. Um, I am interviewing people that I know in solidarity to share their story, and we have here once again a friend of the show, um, somebody I've known for many years. And it's really weird because day before yesterday, before last rather, evening before last, and we had Tina Phillips here. I think you know who Tina Phillips is. And
Oh yeah,
she was our guest here. So and we have Dwight Welch here. So Dwight Welch, why don't you um I think they seen you here before. Go ahead and introduce yourself again for any new audience that we may have.
sure. So my name is Dwight Welch. I'm the campus pastor at United Campus Ministry at Montana State University in Billings, Montana. Also advise Out, which is the LGBT student group, and ordained in the United Church of Christ. In the summer times, I tend to do pulpit supply, so I'm usually on the road filling mainline pulpits in rural congregations in eastern Montana. And I've known Melvin for definitely 25 years at a minimum. I was going to say it could be 30 years in terms of SOCNET and the history of the Socialist Party. And I also teach part-time in the philosophy department at MSUB.
There you go. There you go. Yeah. Yeah, and it's been many years, many faction fights in that old Socialist Party.
Yes. If you ever, you can tell you've been, there's a couple parties like this, but if you ever refer to the party, everybody knows what you're talking about. The Socialist Party.
Party, yeah,
The party.
exactly. So anyway, yeah, what's very important about having you. Hello. Oh,
Oh,
okay.
sorry. Yeah. Phone call. I'll call back. Yeah.
Yeah, what's very important about having you here, in particular, is that you being a gay man, you're also a minister.
Yeah. I was going to say, I mean, and I'm old now because I went to the 25th anniversary of Stonewall back in '94 in New York. It was about within a year of coming out, but it was a nice experience going from Montana to New York City, seeing 1 million+ people at Pride. So yeah, no, exactly. The thing is that what was helpful is that there was both a campus ministry and some local churches that were really important to me as I was coming out in the early '90s. In particular, around '92, '93, there was a church called University Congregational that was going through their open and affirming process. And they were bringing in theologians and doing book studies and definitely trying to get an understanding on LGBT issues. And before they made a public commitment, which they did in '93. And so I was in college at that time. That was good timing for me. And that's how I ended up being in the United Church of Christ, because this was the denomination that early on took on LGBT equality. And one of the things that's important to know is they came out with their first statement in support in 1967. The UCC actually had a theologian and minister who wrote a book in 1961 called Christ and the Homosexual. But as a denomination in '67, they put together a working paper that said, don't discriminate. Discrimination is bad, right? I mention all this because I'll mention one other story, which was I used to be a campus minister at the University of Kansas. And they had an interesting story. Right after Stonewall, there was an LGBT group that was trying to organize at the University of Kansas, and the university would not let them meet on campus. But the campus ministry was just a block away, right across from the football stadium. And the ecumenical campus ministry said, come hang out with us. So that's where the group organized. I mention that only to say that sometimes affirming churches are usually, sometimes there are folks on the left who assume that if you run into an affirming church, they were dragged kicking and screaming, that secular culture was way ahead of churches. But in fact, in some instances, and certainly in the UCC case, it was churches who were first, really at the gate line in terms of tackling this as an important issue. And though I suspect that much of Christianity, like much of the society, kind of, there are folks who are way ahead of the game. There are folks who are playing catch up, and then there are folks who forever will oppose LGBT equality. And obviously, those are the public voices that we hear today.
Yeah, and what's kind of important. You mentioned United Church of Christ, and a lot of people. I mean, it's one of the smaller mainline Protestant churches, but it's one of the most progressive, liberal of the mainline Protestant churches. But here's something that a lot of people would not be aware of about it. It traces itself strangely back to the Puritans.
Yeah,
ironic.
Yeah, if you see it's the UCC is a union of the Congregationalists and the German Evangelical and Reformed, and so if you're, especially in New England and especially in the Northern Plains, if you see a church like, besides First Congregational, you might see a church like Mayflower Congregational, Pilgrim Congregational, Puritan Congregational. These are Mayflower. Yeah, these are all indications of the history that goes back to the 1600s. It's an interesting. There's a whole side story of how they ended up becoming the most liberal church. Though obviously there's a lot of churches that claim that, including the Unitarians, who are a split up from the Congregationalists, right? I think oddly enough, in Calvinism, there's this trust in the natural world as a good place, as a reflection of God's purposes, and a trust in science to get us good information about the world. And once you have those two components in play, even you can find liberalizing tendencies, at least from the 1700s onwards, where you can see why Puritanism was going to end up playing the role that it did in progressive struggles. Initially, obviously you see it with abolitionism.
Go ahead.
Yes. Oh, you can say, because abolitionism was not, today it's treated as just a given, obviously, that slavery is bad. But the pro-slavery side had Bible passages on their side, right? Because there are passages in the Bible that are pretty clear about you can enslave this group and enslave that group. What the abolitionists had to do was to talk about the spirit of the Bible, right? Where's the Bible going? And where the Bible is going is increasing levels of freedom and liberation, and the spirit of Jesus and the spirit of how the Bible unfolds. So the abolitionists had a tougher biblical case than the pro-slavery folks. It just so happened to be they were on the right side morally. that helps. The other thing that helps is and this is what happened on the LGBT front, is that once folks who were being oppressed were able to articulate their own oppression and respond to it and be heard, that shakes up everything. And a lot of oppressive forms of religion do everything they can to make sure that certain voices just simply isn't heard. Women, LGBT, people of color, lots of different ways of being that don't fit the paradigm of these conservative religious groups, and getting their voices out always been the key.
Yeah. Now, this is a fictitious program, so it's just kind of like a creative license that they're using, but you're familiar with the TV show Dark Shadows, right? From the 1960s.
Yes.
Yes, Barnabas Collins, Dark Shadows. There was a part of Dark Shadows, this connection to the church, and then we'll get back to the subject at hand. Just kind of a little trivia for you. Do you remember the time period when Victoria Winters in a seance went back into the year 1795, and then they thought she was a witch. The Reverend Trask, there was a character named Reverend Trask who was a fanatic in Collinsport at that time, and who yielded a lot of political influence in the community. And he hated Victoria Winters, who came out of nowhere, and he tried to frame her for witchcraft. Well, they don't specify, but I think that they were trying to make it. He was like some kind of Congregationalist minister, and I think like the Congregationalists, I think that most Congregationalist churches kind of evolved into what is now United Church of Christ. But I think that was what they were trying to insinuate in the TV series. Maybe I'm thinking too much about that.
Well, if it was New England, then that would be the case. I mean, if you want to think the separation of church and state, you'll notice people who oppose the separation of church and state will often appeal to the fact that the New England colonies had state churches, and they did. The 14th Amendment does away with that, right? Because the laws of the federal Constitution are also required to be upheld by the states under the 14th Amendment. But really, the state churches started falling apart. They were called the Standing Order churches, and they fell apart in the 1820s. And that was because the Unitarian Congregationalists split. In places like Massachusetts, Vermont, and other places, the way the Standing Order worked, everybody in the community kind of owned that church. It was like a people's church, right? Including people who didn't attend. And there were folks who were in the church who didn't like the idea that their neighbor who never showed up to church actually had a right to help call the minister and determine policies of the church. But that's what happens when you create a public church, right? It's owned by everybody. And so in some measure, once the Unitarians and Congregationalists started fighting with each other at that period, it was over those sets of issues. And the Standing Order essentially dissolves. The local churches are basically become governed by the people who participate in those churches. And that's free association of religion, right? That's separation of church and state, which is a good thing. I can't say it's good for every congregation, but what it does do is it's supposed to remove the ability of the whole community to micromanage what a given religious congregation does. And it should be loved by everybody, including the most conservative Christians. But I think they think they've got political power now, right?
Yes.
I mean, if you want to, this is a broad statement to make, but it's like Christianity never looks good when we get political power, and neither does Islam, and neither does Hinduism, or Judaism. Like, religion does really well when it's a pluralistic society, and we all have to kind of play our part in the community. The moment one group gets in charge, it's bad. Right. And a lot of the things that you're seeing that people are really scared about Christian nationalism is because they've got some political power, and they're using it against the wider community, and that's the problem. But
Marjorie Taylor Greene, she's proud to call herself a Christian nationalist. Oh my gosh.
Yeah, that's and the funny thing is when they appeal to that, and they'll appeal to the Standing Order, you're like, well, you don't want the Congregationalists to be running things, because if you did, we'd mandate gay marriage for every church.
Okay, yeah, what's interesting?
They don't want that. Yeah.
I'll tell you what's interesting. As a civil libertarian, I was very glad about the passage of the Respect for Marriage Act, because that legislation was bipartisan. It was one of the few times where Democrats and Republicans got together and molded legislation that actually made sense. I mean, and both Democrats and Republicans actually put their input into legislation that kind of protected. Yes, it was meant to protect the LGBTQ community and their right to marital equality, and that is the most important part. But it also, and yeah, I would say that even though I would disagree with the social conservatives in their opposition to it, but it also protects their right in their little corner if their churches don't want to have their marriage. And honestly, in those churches, I don't think LGBTQ people are going to be going to those churches anyway. They'll find another church to go to. So, but they kind of work something out, and I was surprised to find out that the Latter Days Church of the Mormons actually ended up supporting a legislation that was LGBTQ affirming with this.
No, it's been interesting. There's a little tension between the LDS and the wider evangelical community. There was in terms of doctrine, but now it's playing itself out in the one thing that actually matters, which is social, which is social policy, right? And seeing the LDS kind of split from the wider evangelical movement is interesting, because in the 90s there had been this kind of attempt to get the far right Catholics, LDS, and evangelicals and Jewish people all on the same page, create a united ecumenical and interfaith front against liberalism. And in some measure that, it certainly has politically potent power, but it was intriguing to me that Ron DeSantis, when interviewed and asked about his Catholicism, was on the Christian Broadcasting Network, was nervous to do so. He was afraid to claim his Catholicism. So I think that union is less strong than people imagine between the LDS, evangelicals, Catholics. And now it is a weird thing to point out that in some of these mega churches that don't accept LGBT people, that some of them are seeker friendly such that they won't talk about it much. And so, in fact, there are LGBT folks who do show up to those churches, and they get a little bit shocked when they are just told later on that, they can't have, they can't be recognized. Or I know a lesbian couple in Oklahoma who was involved in the church for years, and nobody ever told them that this was forbidden in that church. And they wanted to teach Sunday school, and they were like, well, you can't teach Sunday school because, you're a lesbian. But they had poured years of their life and money and resources into this church, and without any awareness. So I kind of feel like some of those churches are being a bit sleazy. Like, tell me that you oppose me or tell me that you support me, but don't be playing a game, a bait and switch. Right?
Take a stand one way or the other, in other words.
Yes. Because otherwise you just get a lot of people who are hurt because they don't know and they're not clear. And there's a group called clarity.org that tries to tease out, these are the mega churches. They're not necessarily the same as some of the Christian nationalist patriot churches that we've been seeing in the last few years. But these are the seeker-friendly, kind of places that build on their accessibility. But, I always ask churches, like, can I get married in that church as an openly gay man? Can I serve in any office? Can I hold my husband's hand at church? Will we be counted as a couple when they put out the church directory? And lastly, but important, and I give this to the mainline church too, given 500 pieces of legislation against trans people this year in state legislatures across the country, will you speak out? Will you put yourself in a visible way in support of LGBT folks, and in particular trans people, because because it's so important, and because I think there's some churches that don't want to get too connected or put themselves out there, but really it's really needed is the thing, and especially here in Red America, which you and I are both in states that voted for Trump. So
Yeah. In fact, I live in Trump country. Johnson County's like this is deep red Trump country. I mean, there's like Trump flags. You see these pickup trucks with these Trump flags flying around and everything. So,
oh yeah, no, that's exactly it.
I was trying to be snarky with one person that when Donald Trump was speaking in Selma last year and a half or ago, they had this at the one of the hotels at grounds. They had this tent and they were selling these Trump items and everything like that. And I was trying to be cute as I rolled down my window. And what I rolled out of the window. I said, "Let's go, Brandon, from the left." He didn't get it. He looked at me like, "Huh?" I mean, because I'm all for let's going Brandon, but from the left, I say let's go Brandon. So, no. but anyway, let's talk about share as much detail as you want, and if there's any detail that you don't want to share, that's good. I know there's some things that everybody has detail they don't want to share for their reasons, but your life as a gay man, as a Protestant minister, and as a socialist, how's it been for you?
It's weird because I grew up in the 1980s when, at least in Montana, the mainline Protestant church and the Catholic church that was Christianity. I didn't know anything about evangelicalism. I never really encountered it growing up. It wasn't until I think I met somebody in high school who was like listening to Christian music, which I would have thought were hymns, Michael W. Smith, and he had stuff from the Discovery Institute, which I guess is a creationist organization. And so sometimes, because I'm on the left and a Christian, people assume I deconstructed, I'm an ex-evangelical, and it's like, no, I never lived in that world. I've always been a mainline Protestant. And so that's all. And also I'm about 10 years older, 20 years older than some of these ex-evangelicals, so I didn't grow up with that subculture at all. I didn't really run into my dad was like a church organist and taught Sunday school. I went to vacation Bible school, church camp. I went to Sunday school every single Sunday. Even when we were on vacation, we went. We used to sing church hymns. Me and my adoptive dad. He had an organ at the house or the apartment, and we would sing church hymns as kind of fun things to do. And so it never occurred, but also, he was a social worker in the Reagan years, right? And he was a moderate because he supported Mondale in the primary, where all his coworkers were for Jesse Jackson. That was an interesting experience for me because all the adults that I knew in my life who really wanted to articulate a position were clearly in support of Mondale Ferraro. And, I was like 12 at the time, but, you turn on the TV and then you see the map and it was all red, right? Because 84, I think, was the first election where the color switched. CBS News, Dan Rather, he had that computer system he was so excited about, and they had the color coding and the whole thing. And so it was a realization that what I grew up with, which was basically that you help the poor, right? I mean, that's why the government exists, right? You try to make life better for folks. That's the purpose. And obviously, seeing my dad as a social worker, and he had been involved in he worked. Actually, he was an adoptive dad. I was in foster care, so he was my social worker, and then he ended up adopting me. He had worked for the Carter administration, and he had served on a commission on the family that Jimmy Carter had put together. And, and they even came up with things like, how you have the environmental impact statements. If you're going to build some project, how's it going to impact the environment? You had to count those costs. Well, he had proposed something like that for children. How does this, whatever the legislation is, or whatever the action is being done, how does it impact children? and even in the 70s, trying to create a movement to give children much more legal standing than they do now. You know, and to protect themselves from abuse and to give them opportunities. So that's what I grew up with, and it wasn't until I was involved in the '92 campaign. I was involved with Clinton campaign, and I got involved with InterVarsity, which was an evangelical group on campus. And I was very involved with the Young Democrats. I think we both were involved with the College Democrats.
Oh yeah. we have different stories about the College Democrats. Your College Democrats at your university sounded way better than my College Democrats.
Well, we were, '92, we were all divided, because, there were a few of us that were for Harkin. I'm really dating myself here, and a few that were for, Jerry Brown. One of those would end up becoming who was for Jerry Brown, and ended up becoming Obama's campaign manager back in 2012, because which is so weird.
And of course, about my College Democrats. One person from my College Democrats became a nationwide, well-known, if not alt-right figure. He evolved into a quasi alt-right figure.
Yeah, no, that's it. Yeah, that's why. Yeah,
Disappointing.
Like, that is very disappointing. I know. And I'm in touch with some of the College Democrats from undergrad, but I had Democrats say, "Well, how can you be a Christian? It's homophobic, it's anti-women's choice, anti-LGBT," and I'm like, "No, I don't know. I know the religious right is, but that's clearly not Christianity, properly understood, And then, of course, I go to InterVarsity, and they're like, "How can you be a Democrat? They support baby killing," and no, that's not how that, so that '92 is the first time I become aware of this tension that is, well, I was going to say supposed to exist, but I think it does now. I mean, what you saw in the '90s, which was the apex of evangelical power. One of the things that's telling is that evangelicals have had a huge collapse in their numbers. I think the turn to authoritarianism in the last, especially after the loss of Roe, is an indication of their fear as well as their political power. But they were a third of the country back in the early '90s, and '92 was the campaign where Pat Buchanan at the Republican convention declared a culture war, and we've been living that out ever since. So the '90s are an interesting period because that is where you start seeing Christianity becoming genuinely identified with the Republican Party. And what we saw in the Bush years, we thought, well, that's just crazy. But, at least Bush was an evangelical. You kind of understood his story. And you could see how the ways in which they ran on issues to appeal to evangelicals. But, by Trump, he had nothing to do with evangelicalism, but because he promised raw political power to punish evangelicals' enemies, that was enough. So the scales have really fallen off in terms of the movement of the religious right. But the problem is that over the last 30 years, what was a trend has become just an iron law, which is if you're white and you're center left, and I say white because this is not the same for African Americans, right? But definitely for white people, if you're on the center left, you probably aren't connected to churches. And there's a lot of social pressure actually not to identify with Christianity, and the reverse is the case if you're on the right. I mean, I have a brother-in-law he's never attended church in 30 years, but he loves Trump, so he identifies as an evangelical. Do you know that over half of all Republican Muslims identify as evangelical?
Run that by me again.
Over half of all Muslim Republicans identify as evangelical.
No, I did not. That's no, I didn't. I never put evangelical in the equation with Muslims. I would put socially conservative, perhaps.
Yeah. What happened is the word evangelical has just meant somebody who's politically conservative, who takes religion seriously, and is on the right. And so it's become a political term. And like,
It was an umbrella term, I guess. I mean, I guess anybody can be a socially conservative religious person can be an evangelical, since that's a political term today.
It is a political term today. Now, if you're a scholar of religion, that's going to blow your mind, because it came out of Protestantism, right? It's a certain way of being a Protestant. And sorry, getting some wires here. But yeah, basically, so it belongs to Protestantism as a subcategory, not to non-Christian religions. But I raise that to say that all this is to say that in 2023, for me to say I'm a gay Christian pastor who has spent my life on the left will seem like I'm really bucking the trend. I'm really this crazy anomaly. And in some ways, that certainly could be the case. Though I'll give some stats on that in a sec. But the thing was, it wasn't 30 years ago. I mean, in the world that I grew up in, that was the thing, obviously. And so I'm kind of a survivor of a different era, socially and politically, where it wasn't as unusual. But, I saw a kind of a thing on this. Only 7% of churchgoers are involved in congregations. Well, these are of the top 20 denominations in the U.S. that are LGBT supportive, and 93% are not. And this person who was articulating this was saying, see, Christianity is a hopeless right-wing mess, and there's no point to Christianity. But I would only note that, there's a lot of Christians in the U.S., and so if you get 7% of them, that means there's tens of millions of Americans all across the country, even in rural Montana, that are LGBT supportive. When we were in the Socialist Party, we had 1,500 members.
Yeah, at its most, when it was kind of quasi growing. Yeah,
exactly. So you're kind of going, you mean you're going to tell me there's tens of millions, and let's say something like that, there's tens of millions of liberal Christians who are politically on the left, who support LGBT folks, and these tens of millions of Christians are located pretty much all over the U.S. I mean, there's obviously more concentrations in certain areas. Nonetheless, that's really potent. That's politically potent. That's religiously potent. It feels like these are folks we should connect to, and be and work with. And in fact, that is in fact what happens. In a lot of communities, it just is. So even though, yes, I'm an anomaly in terms of the wider Christian U.S. church situation, that's a big group of folks, right? And so you're just going to have a lot of folks, even if we're a minority. As for the only thing which people might have thought I might have gone into is my personal theology or biography of this. I did not. Because I grew up mainline, I did not have a crisis of faith coming out. I had churches who were supportive, and that meant the world. So, I mean, the first person I came out to was a pastor. So that tells you anything. But I didn't have a internal crisis of faith. To me, it always made sense that you can be on the left and gay and a Christian. It never. And so I was glad to receive support from faith communities in that, but it wasn't like a personal existential journey. How do I wield this thing together? It was it fit, and then I found communities where that fit. I grew up in communities where that fit, and I continue in my adult life to be in communities where you could do all three.
Yeah.
And I'm from Montana. I'm just saying I'm not in a major metropolitan area, but we're going to have pride, and we're going to have at least, a dozen churches who will be at Pride and have tables and march and be in the parade, and our campus ministry is going to be there. And so the church presence is just obvious. And we're having a drag show at First Congregational Not Drake show. Drake's Story Hour.
Mm-hmm.
Drag Queen Story Hour. Because we have all these restrictions that the state of Montana has passed on all that, but you can't regulate churches. So our church, we have churches doing this. So it's an important part, even in like rural communities.
There you go. There you go. But I'm telling you, very early on, just in the 1980s and the 1990s, I just noticed this, how the religious right had just been kind of just fixated on this campaign against the simple concept of equality. And what happened, Obama didn't cause equality to happen, but it happened under Obama's watch. Finally, with the Oglethorpe decision, when same-sex marriage was recognized by the Supreme Court as a constitutional right, it looked like for about 5 minutes, it looked like the people kind of getting over it. That even some conservatives were like, "Well, I guess it's okay." They almost had that attitude for about 5 minutes. And then all of a sudden, it seems like it was like a slam back to 1987 with the they're like openly hostile. They weren't for a while. And it kind of, the way that they went about it, from what I've observed, they went from like the hatred, like if you got AIDS, it didn't even matter if you were gay, if you got AIDS by a blood transfusion or anything, it was your fault because AIDS was some kind of a punishment from God, and they had that attitude. And when they realized how crazy that sounded, they just kind of changed their tactic a little bit, and they were like, "Well, we just don't believe in special rights, or we just don't believe in the marriage thing." And they always tried to do a little PR stunt while they still ended up hating the LGBTQ community. Then they tried to do this pretend selective libertarianism thing. Nothing against libertarians saying this, but and then all of a sudden, it's like, damn, wham, they're back to 1987. They're out there to try to groom children, and just that whole. It's like homophobia made an ugly comeback. It's like in your face.
Yeah, it really has. It really has. They've done a survey came out. So marriage support for marriage equality has definitely taken a decline in the last couple of years, and it's almost exclusively a drop in Republican support, which went from something like 57% supporting to like 41, which is a crazy drop, right? But it tells you how politically effective and unified the right-wing message is on these issues. And of course, it was directed initially against trans people. And there was a few, gay and lesbians who thought, "Oh, we won't be in the crosshairs. It's just trans people." But the thing is, it's all of us, right? We're all being attacked. And the issue, and those numbers bear it out. The continual attack is not just on trans, but on all LGBT people. So, like, if we have to win the trans right battle, if we don't win that one, we're all, as a gay person, I'm a sitting duck kind of thing, and when I see the polemic on the right wing, they are going after, I can't say the name, but Oberfell. That is definitely on the priority, among other things. So, you do it because it's right. You do it because you want your trans friends to thrive and do well and succeed in the U.S. and get the supports that are needed. But you might also consider self-interest and say we really they really are coming after all LGBT people, and the rhetoric is definitely inclusive of all that. It has been a politically weird story to tell you. I'm just going off on a weird tangent. In the late, there's a book, and I will see if we can find it. I'll bring you the title here. I'm doing a book endorsement for Rick Perlstein's Reaganland. I don't know if you had seen this before.
What's it called?
Rick Perlstein's Reaganland.
Reaganland. Okay, that sounds like it would be an interesting book.
America's Right Turn, 1976 to 1980. But basically, the argument, the story he recounts at one point was there was a TV preacher who kept on saying, said, gay people basically want to mass murder all of us. You know, if you see a gay man coming down the street, they would just as soon kill you. And it was the local public station that owned, the community station that gave him that street preacher that venue. Basically said, well, you can't keep on doing that. You're maligning gay people. You're creating threats of violence against them with this kind of language. Like, if you don't stop with this kind of language, we're going to kick you off the air. You can't be on our TV station and do that. So of course he continued, and they kicked him off the air. Anyways, the religious right organized this massive protest. I guess this is down in Florida. And basically just rage against this TV station. How dare, evangelicalism be, censored, right, for this, because they didn't want to put on that kind of hate speech. But the guy who was recounting the story was a young conservative activist by the name of Michael Huckabee. And he said to the paper, it was, the right wing that had gathered were just one step away from literally dismantling the TV station brick by brick. It was all they could do not to commit gross violence against this TV station. And that was how much visible the anger was. But apparently Mike Huckabee learned a lesson, and so did the right, of how potent the fear of LGBT people are as an organizing principle on the right. And because and what you discover you're reading Rick Perlstein is that the 70s rhetoric gave way to the 80s rhetoric that we saw growing up, and it seems to always be at the surface, which somebody who's a more astute political analysis would have to go, there's something weird about gender and visions of gender that undergird the right, and in particular undergird fascism, which at the U.S. level right now they're kind of intertwined. Mm-hmm. And obviously that's the problem. And that's a problem for our politics.
Being around the same age, you probably remember a certain U.S. senator from North Carolina by the name of Jesse Helms.
Yeah.
Well, let me tell you, in 1984, and I didn't know this till several years later, I knew who Jesse Helms was in 1984. I knew he ran against Governor Jim Hunt in 1984 in that election. This I did not know till several years later. Apparently, there was a pro-Jesse Helms newspaper, I believe it was called The Landmark, and there's no way that Jim Hunt, it was so slanderous. I mean, they claimed that Jim Hunt, this paper claimed that Jim Hunt had a homosexual relationship with some young staffer or something like that. And it was obviously not true and everything like that. And so, I don't know what happened, but it was like some kind of a lawsuit or what have you. But I mean, this is the kind of crap that went on down here in North Carolina with Jesse Helms, and that was something that he was obsessed with. When you think about politicians tied to anti-gay hatred, there were people like Phyllis Schlafly, and you and I talked about on the phone the other day. And people like Jesse Helms and people of this sort, it just kind of, and then you see people today, you see the Matt Walshes and you see the Marjorie Taylor Greens out there. I'm like, they're sort of carrying on their torch.
Yeah, it's like an issue that never goes away. I don't. It's so I will dive into theology for a second. In the New Testament, there's a passage that's quite interesting. It's from Galatians, letter to Galatia by the Apostle Paul, and he's trying to organize a new community of Jews and Gentiles to live together in such a way that those differences that would mark you wouldn't be an impediment to community. And so he has this line that says there was no male or female, Greek or Jew, slave or free, for we are all one in Christ Jesus. Now, that's not meant to be an erasure, right? I'm not. There are obviously men and women, and there are obviously Jewish people and Gentiles, and I imagine that could be a disconcerting passage if you're Jewish to hear a passage like that. But if you know Paul's context, he's trying to build this new community of folks where those identities no longer served as an impediment to community, and that's obviously one of the important letters in the New Testament and kind of the linchpin to Christianity. But the power of gender and to scare men, apparently, and gendered order, which is really what trans people are so offensive, is that they violate this gendered kind of description of the world. But it's one that is not, you just cannot find in the New Testament. But there must be something in our, evolutionary whatever that really latches onto that, because it seems to be a potent source of power. And to be honest, just existing as an LGBT person is a refutation of it. That doesn't mean that we don't all have gendered assumptions in our own head, right? I knew as a kid growing up in Montana in the 80s what was considered manly or not. It was just later discovering that, that's not Christianity, though. Christianity is not concerned about what makes you manly at all. And I'm sorry to tell Josh Hawley that, but it's just true. This is not an interest, not an ongoing concern to be expressed in the New Testament. In fact, my husband kind of mentioned this. A lot of this comes from the 19th century. This idea of, Emerson said that civilization is a conspiracy against our manhood. And what Emerson meant is actually kind of conservative. I mean, it's kind of like, well, in the age of machines, we don't have people who are farmers and builders, and they use their hands, and those are what it means to be a man. And we were going soft. And Theodore Roosevelt had that fear too. And there was, when they developed the YMCA, it was, we wanted to teach men how to be manly men, and that's and they didn't want to wussify Jesus, right? They wanted Jesus as a soldier or a cowboy or a cop or somebody strong, baseball player. But the thing about it is, some of that anxiety rests on what a lot of them will say, which is that, well, Christianity is kind of a woman's religion. And it's true. If you go to churches, women are going to be more likely to be involved, and they're going to be likely holding that whole show together. But my husband kind of raised the idea, which I think is true, is that, well, there probably is something about Christianity that is just very feminine. Maybe Jesus really is that. Maybe Jesus really is a feminine figure, and he stands as a rebuke, to all the ways in which you use masculinity to destroy and hurt other people. And so, yeah, women were the first to find Christianity to be good news, and they, and that tells you something. So maybe there's something fundamental in the New Testament that gives us an uneasy conscience about how we organize ourselves. And if so, that's good. I will take the wussified Jesus who loves the children, right? And, let the children come unto me. And, and hangs out with the women. And as opposed to whatever this Christian nationalist, I don't know what it is.
Well, I know
people are bodybuilders for Christ,
You're talking about the memes that exists out there, Republican Jesus.
Republican Jesus. Yeah, I don't know.
He's holding an AR-15 and wearing just has a Trump "Make America Great" again.
Oh yeah, you're kind of like there's nothing. I mean, the one thing that makes me kind of encouraged. There's a quote from John Cobb, who's a process theologian, and if you're interested in the politics of climate change, he's spent really the last 50 years writing on that and on the environment. But he had this phrase. He goes, "There's something in the New Testament or in the Gospels that just always stands as a corrective and always acts as a rebuke, really, to the way we kind of organize stuff. You know, you need to create a supply side. Remember the supply side Jesus cartoon that Al Franken had in his book? It was like the supply side Jesus, yeah, the Republican Jesus, because that's just not what you're going to find in the New Testament. And so you kind of have to construct a Jesus that's going to be the right wing culture warrior that you want, because it's just not there. And so there's always this weird, uneasy conscience on the right about the actual source material, which is very weird because, supposedly liberals are the ones who aren't supposed to engage the Bible. But in fact, if you constructed a Jesus to be a militarist with an AR-15, you're pretty far from the source material. You're pretty far from what was actually in the text itself. Yeah, at that point.
Yeah, I prefer, the concept. I prefer the Mediterranean olive skin, Palestinian born Jewish socialist hippie Jesus.
Yeah, no, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And the thing is that I think all religious traditions have the ability to be a source of liberation, and in some measure that's a decision by their followers, right? And there are resources to do that, because there's something about liberation that is connected to our basic ethical intuitions that recognizes the humanity in one another, and in the poor and in the marginalized, so I think that if we're on the left, that's something you want to encourage. I don't think you necessarily want to encourage, quote unquote. Sometimes I see debates on the left whether religion is a good thing or a bad thing, and of course the answer is yes. Right? It is a good thing and a bad thing, right?
I agree. It is good and it's bad.
It's exactly. Can be forms. It can encourage credulity. It can certainly be a potent form of reaction, and we were seeing that in the U.S. And all of this is true, but obviously, when you look in particular to the Black church experience, and when you look at the LGBT folks, we've been a part of the church forever. We're here. We're some of us are in the church pews, and we too have the ability to read texts and interpret them, and shape and fashion a religion that hopefully adds to human well-being. So.
So yeah. So, but what's optimistic today, what I see, there are affirming churches today that was not as prevalent 40 years ago or 50 years ago by the numbers. That's a good thing. The broader population still is more LGBTQ friendly and affirming than they were 40 some years ago. With the right wing kind of gaining strength, they're going to have some roadblocks, because the LGBTQ community has more allies now than they did 45, 50 years ago.
Well, that's the thing. And in particular, I think the surveys that I've seen is if you're under 30, it's something like 90% support. And that bears it out. I work on a campus that gets a lot of students from rural eastern Montana. And most of them grew up Republican, because that's kind of what it means to grow up in rural eastern Montana. And I just do not find among my college students anybody who's, outside of like literally a handful of students, that is not going to be supportive. And it's not seen as a left-right issue. It's just seen as I have friends and I support my friends, right? I was talking to a foster sister, talking about trans issues, and she's like, "Well, they're people." Yeah, they're people. you know that that that's not a bad place to just reflect on it. And so yeah, I think that in some ways the crazy reaction we're seeing, like I said, the loss of Roe empowered the right wing to dream every fantasy they could envision, right? Because Roe was the great untouchable, and once it was gone, well, you can envision anything, right? Why not have a state religion? Why not ban birth control? Why not lock trans people away? I mean, who knows? Maybe the court will agree to it, but it's bumping up against the reality of the action. They've not convinced most Americans. That is the thing. So all the dreams they have that you see on Twitter, and they're real and they're dangerous to be sure, but they are also born out of a kind of a fear and desperation, because the time and the numbers are not on their side. And it reminded me of the early 2000s when Karl Rove was pushing gay marriage bans. And the reason they were doing that is like, well, yeah, they had political power to do it, and they won big time. But they knew that the poll numbers were already going against them. And within a couple of years, almost all of those, and then were struck down by local courts, and then obviously later by the Supreme Court. But so a lot of the right wing operates out of fear. And fear happens because they don't really have the political power and in a democracy, if you don't have the political power, your job is to convince people. But they're not trying to convince people. They've kind of moved beyond a democratic kind of model, right? I mean, I when I was in college or high school, I can't, I became convinced that the death penalty was a gross injustice. And then I saw the poll numbers. 90% of Americans back in the early 90s supported the death penalty.
I remember those days. I was a very, very lonely figure on that issue. I never.
Yeah. And by the way, we weren't oppressed for it, because the right wing is, most people support gay marriage, right? So if you listen to the average religious right person, they're oppressed because most people don't agree with them. Well, imagine us when we were trying to oppose the death penalty, and we had like 10%, or the Gulf War, where Bush had over a 90% approval rating, and some of us are going, nah, I don't think so. I don't think this is the way to go about things. But in a democracy, you have to go and talk to people, convince people. And the right's rhetorical methods and practices preclude that. It's only you notice that on the Democrat side, they're always having anxiety about how are they going to talk to rural America. And I'm grateful, actually. They should, right? Democrats should talk to rural America. I happen to live in rural America. I would love to see that and to see a much, Howard Dean's kind of 50 state strategy and build local power. But only Democrats talk this way, right? Republicans aren't going, well, how can we win San Francisco? How can we win New York City, right? They don't, because again, they don't have. When the left is kicked out of power, the first thing we start doing is going, okay, well, we obviously need a better way to articulate and to present and to build majority coalition for power. And at this point, I don't think the right. They move. I mean, the one thing about Reaganism was it was a belief that somehow they had the country on their side. And it was a happier politics, even if it was very destructive. But now, when you hear the anti-gay conservatives, they pretty much think America is just a lost cause, And good luck trying to convince middle America. Yeah, America's terrible. Burn it all down. Vote for our candidate.
And I'm tell you, but there is glimmer of hope, because when my parents were here, dad, mom and dad, I mean, they're mom, they're not. I mean, they're kind of conservative and everything. They're in their 80s, kind of conservative. They're not like super political, but they. My mom's a pro-life Democrat, and my dad's, kind of middle of the road Republican. Nominally Methodist. My mom's a Catholic, and think about it is, they show the I was showing them the Dylan Mulvaney Bud Light commercial, saying, "Look at all these crazy right wingers going crazy over this." And my mom and dad never really were like woohoo about LGBTQ issues, and they did not look one bit bothered by Dylan Mulvaney. They thought she was a little silly, but I mean, they didn't think that they didn't think that there was any horrible issue to be so outraged about. I mean,
it's because it's the culture war has this. I mean, on the one hand, LGBT equality, women's rights, these are obviously substantive and important issues, but the way they get cashed out in the proxy wars is to take things that couldn't possibly matter, like Potato Head, or whether Dylan Mulvaney or endorses Budweiser, and they use that, and it works obviously for a certain group. But I can tell you that when again, I'm working with my college students, it feels like it's not serious politics, and it's true, it's not. It literally is not. And I thought about that with I have a foster family in Miles City, and if you were to think about things that really could impact them, I have a foster brother who works for the Postal Service. So when McCarthy was threatening to shut down the government, and bankrupt, essentially ruin the credit of the U.S., right? That it would impact my foster brother big time, right? If the government is operating and paying its bills or not will depend if he actually goes to work. That's a pretty basic question, whether you can go to work and get a paycheck. It's not going to be stuff like Mr. Potato Head, right? That literally nobody's existence in any way will be impacted by it. So there's a weird lack of seriousness, but I say that knowing that when people's identities are wrapped into a certain kind of vision of what it means to be Christian or right wing or whatever, any kind of, I guess, whatever symbol you can use to delineate the tribe has its own power emotionally. But to me, like having my brother work and get a paycheck matters more, or my foster sister who's receives disability support for her kids, and when Republicans want to cut disability support, well, that matters. It should matter, right? Because that brings it home. And the sad part about in those cases is, or in my foster sister's case, is it's dependent on the state functioning well. And the thing about the culture war issues is they make you not have to worry about what your governor is doing, or your state legislature, or your city. If you're upset, I heard there was a teacher in Berkeley and she said her story instead of history, and I'm really upset. Okay. Pay no attention to the folks who actually, pave your roads and make sure your school works and your healthcare system works. But be upset at that teacher, in Berkeley that you heard about who said her story, or we need reparations. It's just like it has a weird way of breaking our politics, because we lose the connecting points of who's responsible for what and who has the power. What was it that Tony Benn? Who has the power to make those decisions, and how do we get rid of you if you don't want? The 5 questions of democracy from Tony Benn.
right.
We lose that in the culture war, because if you're fixated on Twitter or even like Fox News or Newsmax, if you're fixated on that, you're not going to know what your governor's doing.
Yeah.
what your city's doing, and that's going to impact you greatly. So it's a huge disservice to our democracy, which I think is the point.
Hey, I got a humorous story to share with you. Do you know who Steve Deese is?
No.
I believe he works for Blaze TV. He's like one of the lower tier people that works for that network, has a show. He's attacking Donald Trump from the right. He was basically saying that Donald Trump keeps attacking him, attacking Ron DeSantis. Bam, bam, bam. He's obsessed with him. You know, it's almost like it's a homoerotic obsession. And it's interesting. It's happening during Pride Month that he keeps talking about Ron DeSantis. You know, I mean, so he's basically saying Donald Trump is basically this is This is going to be fun to watch the Republican primaries to see them go at it, you know?
Well, you know, and it's obviously this guy sounds like a DeSantis supporter, but you are kind of going, well, I mean, two things. One is it doesn't take any explanation. DeSantis scares Trump. That's why. And now, as a gay person, I'm scared of DeSantis and Trump, you know, for different reasons. But I think they're both obviously very dangerous. If they
are,
yeah. And in fact, in some ways, DeSantis could be more dangerous because I think he has a work ethic and knows how government works, and he can manipulate it against whole groups of people in a way that Trump doesn't, you know, have the self-discipline to do. But Trump would be dangerous too because I think he's on a revenge tour. He's gonna. If he got political power, he'd use it to punish anybody who stood in his way in his first term, and that would really endanger the country and on multiple levels. But I have dreams that there's a dark horse candidate who will upend the apple cart, and especially Trump's indictments and. You know, he may not be the last guy standing, but it's nerve-wracking because the rhetoric they use impacts us all, and it's trickled down. It percolates all the way down to what happens on the schoolyard.
Dwight, I'm going to interrupt for a second. There's somebody here on the chat line. I am glad that she's on the chat line, and her name is Ellen Jimerson. And I'm going to talk to I'm going to talk to Catty Ann and Warren in a second here. See, she says, hi, Willie and Dwight. So it's nice to be able to tune in. She is a Baptist minister from Alabama. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, she's like the first, her church, she's like the first Baptist church to do a same-sex wedding in Alabama.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. I would like for y'all to be friends. I think y'all were meant to be friends and everything. So I am glad she's here. So I was trying to, I wanted y'all to connect. I thought to myself, y'all need to connect.
Oh, that'd be wonderful.
Yes. Let's see here. Wonder if by any chance Dwight known Richard Barnum. He's my minister.
Oh, I don't. I know a few folks in Alabama. And I'm just trying to think of. I know a couple of pastors down there, but yeah.
Okay. All right. So, yeah. Anyway. Yeah. As I said, since you're both my Facebook friends, when I get off the line and when I go on Facebook in a little while, I'm going to go and I'm gonna try to connect y'all because I think y'all will be good friends. So.
No, that'd be great. No,
yes. Let's see. Although my church did not support it. I went to a UCC church in Huntsville, Alabama. He's gay too. Okay,
so I'm UCC as well.
Oh, okay. I got you.
So there you got some UCC going on.
All right, there you go. All right. She says, I love that. All right, there you go.
So I should make a plug too, because of your own religious background, Melvin, that basically, I probably during Pride will be marching with the Episcopalians because we have two small congregations here in Billings, and and they're kind of new to Pride, so I'm trying to help support. They were there last year, but to kind of support their presence. So, because I work in an ecumenical campus ministry, so I work with a lot of mainline denominations. But the Episcopal Church was also pretty early on a lot of these, especially for LGBT folks. And so, if anybody finds me on Facebook or Twitter, you can just look up my username. And if you are looking for a faith community in your area that you think might be supportive, but you're not sure, you can just go ahead and contact me. Usually I usually have some good tools to kind of help folks find communities. If you're on the left, if you're LGBT, all these things.
That's great. Yeah, and as I said, it just just part of the human struggle. I want to mention this, and let me say hello real quick to Catherine Ann McCloskey first. Long live the Fist and Rose tendency. That's the thing from the Socialist Party USA. For those that don't know,
yeah,
yep. And then Warren says howdy, extra booyah. So and there's and I got an announcement regarding this guy extra bulla in just a short moment. So but anyway, and if you ever get a chance, Dwight, check out his show Extra Bulla on YouTube. Warren had he does great work, so I highly recommend it. Okay.
definitely.
Yeah, definitely. So I had a person a few weeks ago. Her name was Angie Moon. She's half Jewish, half Venezuelan. She lives in Ireland. She's a socialist. She's bisexual, and she came on my show during LBG, during this Pride series I'm doing during the month of June. So in doing so, we were talking about Germany, the concentration camps that were liberated, at the end of World War II, and all of that. And I did not. I knew that members of the LGBTQ were persecuted under Hitler. I just assumed that they were not embraced or loved when the camps were liberated, but I figured that the camps, they just kind of let them go like everybody else. But apparently they were a lot of them were still kept in prison, in Germany, in the two Germanys, apparently for many years. And this is what I found out. Now, East Germany, communist East Germany, was ahead of the game of West Germany on LGBTQ. They actually was one of the earlier communist states to kind of have a more relaxed attitude toward the LGBTQ community. They started allowing them the rights that the other Eastern Bloc countries obviously did not allow them to have, which was kind of forward thinking for its time, and even more so than in West Germany, which that's a little mind boggling there. And so the criminal codes eventually in West Germany, in Germany, when the two Germanys were reunited, the criminal codes, even though they weren't really enforcing it, that goes back to, I guess, back to the 1890s or something like that. That was it was finally taken off the criminal code in 1994, and believe it or not, the United States was ahead of the game over Germany. It wasn't legalized until 2017, marital equality in Germany. I figured that they probably did it earlier than the United States. Would have just made the assumption.
Yeah, the issue has been, the Christian Democrats ran Germany for so long, and they were pretty conservative about things like that. And that's where when I was coming out, the primary symbol that I remember growing up with is the pink triangle. And the pink triangle is, they had the different kind of triangles, different color systems.
Mm-hmm.
So you had the yellow triangle to identify people who are Jewish, but they had different one color for like Roma, but there was one that was for LGBT that was just pink, and that was the primary symbol I remember growing up. And in fact, I used to have a T-shirt with the pink triangle on it. And I felt like sometime in the '90s, so 1987 was the big march on Washington for LGBT rights. And the rainbow flag was, even though I think the rainbow flag goes back to Harvey Milk and his campaign, but in 1987 it showed up on the national kind of march in Washington D.C. for LGBT equality. The rainbow flag kind of took over and actually I'm grateful, to be honest, because I think the pink triangle is good for our history. We should be aware of where people can go, and we know it happens today. Chechnya was trying to set up, camps for gay people, right? Not so long ago, and so but there's something more in your face and rebellious in a good way with the rainbow flag. It speaks to queer joy and survival and resistance. And so I'm grateful for the rainbow flag, but it is useful to know that, when you look at the Holocaust, and to know that history, because that's the danger of every kind of fascist movement. Fascism almost always needs internal enemies that are a problem to be fixed. And usually at some point that problem is going to be removal. And whatever that looks like, it produced a terrible thing in the last century.
Yeah, well, of all the individuals in the LGBTQ community, the trans community are the most vulnerable right now, and there are people talking about a trans genocide. I mean, Michael Knowles, I believe it was at CPAC or something, was talking about eradication. I mean, he literally used those words.
Yeah, so and right now, so they've done kind of studies on genocide, and people kind of will go, well, nobody's getting killed. Now we actually do know trans people who are killed because they're trans by individual actors, right? But the state isn't doing that, and I get that, but what a lot of the scholars from about fascism and in particular about World War II was, you don't start with killing people, right? You start with earlier stages, right, of demonization and otherization, and we're pretty far. And they've kind of developed a list of different markers you could see, but we are definitely at the stage of people are fleeing. There is an estimate that at least a quarter of a million trans people have fled Red America because they are being cut off of the basic services that anybody, one of us, would have expected to have, like access to healthcare, legal access, legal recognition, and that's being removed. And so we are seeing a huge population shift, and some scholars think it could be as big as what happened when African Americans went up north in the 1930s, right? In search of jobs and an opportunity to escape Jim Crow. We might be in a similar boat with that. And so when you force whole groups of people because of who they are out of your communities, and you deny them legal recognition and their basic rights, and now, at least in a few states, there were forms. Well, was it Vanderbilt Hospital that had been providing transferring care, turned over all their medical records to the right-wing attorney general? Like, medical records are supposed to be private. They're not for the government to be prying their eyes over. That's really disturbing. Why do you need names? In Missouri, they even had a hotline number you could call if you suspected somebody, was undergoing some sort of trans-related health care. So that we are pretty far along. Yeah, I think we are.
Yeah. Yeah, it's crazy because these are the same people who don't want universal health care because that's government snooping people's lives. But you know what? They want to snoop at people's lives. These right wingers, is under their terms they want to snoop into people's lives. They don't want, but they don't want the government to be there to actually save lives. But
Well,
it's crazy.
it was, yeah, there was controversy a couple of years ago because when a doctor is trying to figure out, or a counselor even, how safe is a household. One of the questions you'd want to ask is, are there guns, right? Because if you have a gun in your house, the chances of gun violence just goes through the roof for obvious reasons, because you have a gun in the house, right? But it's a significant issue. But then they wanted to ban the government. They wanted the government to ban the doctors from asking that kind of question. And in the name of privacy, it's like, okay. But yeah, trans people's public records, I mean, a lot of right-wing attorney generals in the South have been harassing hospitals and doctors, in ways that, well, they're meant to intimidate, right? If you can't go to your doctor and explain your life and your medical history for fear of political repercussions, then you just won't. And that means you won't turn. And the issue of any kind of suicide or isolationist moves happens because you don't have trusted people you can go to. And that's authoritarianism, right? That's the direction of authoritarianism. The thing that East Germany did fail at was they were an informant-based society, right? And you never knew if your conversation could get further up the scales to the Stasi. And so people are just very, very careful, right? To who they could talk to and how and why. But that's happening in DeSantis and Abbott in Texas. The laws are based on using informant-like tactics to dissuade people from accessing healthcare or accessing resources, or and that's yeah. And so people start censoring themselves because governments can't actually, outside of North Korea, right? Governments are not so constituted as they can't actually censor much of anything. They need the willing cooperation of people to do it themselves. And that's what's happening, and one of the sad parts is surely these doctors and hospitals will resist. Now, hospitals are corporations. They're there to make money. They're not going to resist DeSantis or Abbott or Donald Trump because they're there to make a buck. And so they're not, this is why, in the 70s, women started organizing their own healthcare collectives because they needed a way to advocate for their own health that was outside of the profit motive.
Well, we need to get the profit motive out of healthcare completely. And I've actually have, if there's one area I have my demeanor is more normie than it was 20 years ago, but I have moved further left on economics, and I became more anti-imperialist on foreign policy. I have, in some areas I have kind of, as I was telling Tina, some of the people that gave me trouble in the SPUSA 20 years ago would like me a whole lot better today. So, but anyhow, no, I'm, yeah, as I said, what was I going to say? But it's getting close to 90 minutes now and everything. So let's see. I guess we talked about, we have everybody here on the chat line that was here. So let me make some announcements real quick. on Tuesday at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, I will be on the JB Font Show, hosted by James Fauntleroy, who's one of the co-hosts of the Revolutionary Blackout Network. I will be a guest on his show, the JB Font Show, at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Saturday night, Sunday morning, June. Let's see. Is it June the 21st? Let me check on that. Let me check. Let me check on my Facebook thing. I have it pinned on my Facebook page. Oh gosh. Let me check real quick. It's on my Facebook page. I don't want to get the date wrong for everybody. That's why, because Saturday turning into Sunday morning with the dates. You know what I'm saying?
I think that's the 24th. It's Saturday should be the 24th and Sunday the 25th.
That's correct. 25th. That's right. Yeah, the 25th of June. I will be on at midnight. I will be a guest on the Secret Show with Warren and Jimmy. I will be a guest on the Secret Show, and that's at midnight Eastern Standard Time. So that should be fun. And so there's that there, and that's the announcements for. And next Thursday, a week from today, Jimi Sunderland and myself will be co-hosting. We're gonna. I forgot the time we're going to be co-hosting, but we'll make the announcement and everything on the time we'll be co-hosting our video and everything. So we'll be doing that as well. So, any final thoughts, Dwight?
No, I was going to say, feel free to follow me on Facebook and Twitter, and we'll connect. And I'd love to be able to, like I said, whether it's LGBT supportive congregations or just anybody who's looking for a faith-based outlet to express left politics, I can connect folks to. And in particular for rural areas, because I mean, like I said, I'm in Montana, and seeing somebody here from Alabama was great too, because it's always worth paying attention to some of the red states, because some of the most interesting activism is happening there. We had Zoe Zephyr, who's a representative from Missoula, who got national attention as a trans legislator after she was thrown out. The two African-American legislators in Tennessee, that one woman in Nebraska who is holding up all legislation to stop the anti-trans onslaught. Some of these red state Democrats are just really knocking it out of the park, and they also give me some hope. So.
Well, yeah. And I hope people fight the good fight wherever they fight the good fight, and wherever they fight the good fight, whether it's inside or outside, wherever the fight can be taken to defeat the right, and whatever it takes. Let's see, and what else was I going to say? Yes, everyone, if you like what you heard, please press like and comment. Comment anyway if you disagree. We'll have a conversation. Feel free to share the content on this channel. As the First Amendment absolutist, it's my duty to inform you to create your own platform and utilize it, because we are the muckrakers of our time. Also, please subscribe to this channel. Hit the notification bell. Follow me on Twitch. Follow me on Twitter, Facebook. All that information is below, as well as Dwight's information is on the description box below. So everybody, you can follow Dwight, and all, his information is down there below as well. Reject corporate media, because they have absolutely nothing to offer. And until next time, I'm Willie Bragg. I will see y'all later. And Dwight, I need to talk to you real quick. So so just stick around.
Okay.
All right. Y'all take care. Bye-bye.